No new cases in New South Wales again today. Is this a sign the outbreak is over?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I mean, it's positive news, obviously, but I mean, essentially what you've got in New South Wales is you've got a big puzzle, which is a join the dots puzzle. You know where the end is, where the people who were picked up initially, and you know where it came from initially by the genetic sequencing. They know where it came from, but they don't know where all the dots are in between. And until we can be really sure we've got all those dots in between, and then can go outwards in terms of actually doing the contact tracing to see how far, if any, these rings go, you can't be totally reassured. But having said that, as time goes by, the risk gets less, but we still are extremely reliant on the contact tracing. But more importantly, if any people are getting symptoms, they've got to get tested, and we can't rely on have complacency about that.
It's an important message. James McCaw, an epidemiologist, predicts that we will have quarantine leaks every month. Is that something you think we should be expecting?
Well, I think we are. I mean, we're starting to see more of them as time goes on, and that's what worries us, because one of these is going to get out of control again, potentially, similar to what's happened in Victoria previously. And you know, if it's left unchecked, as potentially this one could have been, or hopefully it doesn't turn out to be, but left unchecked, we end up with a full-scale outbreak. The quarantine leaks do seem to be appearing quite frequently, and maybe even more now. That's probably because of the load of COVID that's coming from overseas. You know, we're getting more people, and we've seen what's happened with India, but other countries as well. But also it's possible that the variants are somewhat more effective. That means, and the AMA's put it, that, you know, we've had this pause from in terms of returnees from India, but we really need to, you know, use that time to fix every little potential gap in management of hotel quarantine. And I think given the rate that it's happening, the AMA is saying that we do need to find a longer term solution that maybe is out of hotels, maybe, you know, the options similar to Howard Springs, but that has, we do understand, also medical infrastructure and staffing implications. But we do need to start thinking about this, because I think with COVID, we are still talking about the long haul for hotel quarantine or quarantine into the future.
Repatriation flights will begin from India next week. Why next week, and why not now?
Well, I think it's a capacity issue with taking them, I gather, initially to Howard Springs. There's a capacity issue in getting them ready. And I think it's not that easy, I think. And one of the other things that's coming up is this issue about making sure that individuals are actually tested properly before they get brought over here. So you've probably heard about the new the idea. See, part of the problem has been is that so many people were still returning, even though they had a test 2 or 3 days before. Now, the thought was that they're actually getting infected when they're getting the test, because they've actually been quarantining at home prior to coming back, but then going out having a test, getting infected, and the test, it comes back negative, but then they actually become positive later, either directly or by somebody else on the flight. So the sort of the rapid antigen testing that I think is a really good idea. So that's a test that could occur within, you know, 10 or 15 minutes just before people get on the plane, will actually minimise the number of chances that people who are actually actively infectious who've been missed get on the plane and then infect everybody else on the plane. So things like that, little new strategies are the sort of things we're talking about, need to put in place to minimise the risk, not only for people coming back and then causing wider infection, but also for all the people on the plane.
Yeah, such a difficult, fragile situation. The Olympics is going ahead in Tokyo. They're in a state of emergency. We just heard from John Coates there earlier today. He said that some athletes don't want to get vaccinated. Most of them will be getting the vaccine. It'll be available to all of them. What are your concerns? Do you think it should be going ahead at all? And what are the risks to these athletes who won't be getting the jab?
Yeah, look, well, first up, it's an incredibly difficult issue. We do understand. I mean, I suppose, you know, as a sporting event, it is somewhat different to most other events, and that occurs so rarely. You know, the issue with the AMA would be really that if we're going to have the event, we have to offer vaccinations to all athletes and all people participating, really, to protect them. Look, unfortunately, the situation in Japan is looking worse and worse, so that the risk becomes higher and higher. So things are getting more tenuous. Look, I would just implore people to get vaccinated. I mean, it would reduce your risk of severe disease and death, but also you're potentially going to also protect not just yourself, but other people around you, including other individuals within the, around you who are actually supporting you. I think with the vaccinations, even though the main thing is they stop severe disease, there's increasing evidence that they will reduce your infectivity, ability to pass it on. And so, I do think that with vaccinations, it's not just a matter of protecting yourself. It's actually about looking after people around you as well. So I would be imploring those athletes to seriously reconsider and have the vaccine.
As the vaccine does get rolled out, we can start talking about international travel. It is probably still so far away, but Chris, realistically, how close is it? How far away are we from having our borders open with some other nations?
Yeah, really interesting. I'm actually on a meeting just at the moment. We're discussing the longer term future. Look, I think we are still a long way away, and things like quarantine are still going to be a significant part of our world for a while. We are starting, however, and I think the things that are interesting in this meeting that we're talking about is we do need to start to talk about, the longer term future in a mature way, understanding the risks of potentially at some stage in the longer term future opening up. But to do that, we're going to have to really start to look at the increasing evidence, which is going to change over time, but also we've got to get vaccinated. As a country, we have to get vaccinated because this discussion isn't going anywhere until a very large proportion of the population are vaccinated. So just forget about those, opening up the world until that happens. But even then, there will still be some risk because the world will not be vaccinated, and even if we do have a very high rate in Australia and a large proportion protected, there will still be potential for people coming overseas to bring COVID into Australia. And the next discussion has to be about first up, the health system being resilient enough to cope with that. And we've got a health system which is already overburdened at the moment. We need to look at funding for the health system that will actually allow it to actually cope with potentially increased cases of COVID in the longer term future. But also we need to actually have to talk to the community about understanding that there is a risk of opening up. We're not at the moment some people are not coping very much with the very rare instance of complications from the AstraZeneca vaccine, you've heard already. But then when we open up, I think the risk becomes much greater of people getting COVID, which is a completely different level of risk. And I think that's the sort of journey as a community we've got to actually go through to actually understand what it's going to take to open up. But first things first, people have to get vaccinated.
Yeah, well, getting the jab is certainly an incentive if international travel is on the cards and we can open up to the way things were. Dr. Chris Moy, thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure.